How can you tell how long your immigration case is going to take, and how do the government agencies determine processing time for USCIS and other government agencies? That is what we are talking about today at Live at Lunch. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law, and as I said, we're talking about government processing times for immigration filings. We're going to talk both about employment-based filings and family-based filings. So for both of those, regardless of the type of immigration filing that you have, there are a few key considerations when you're thinking about or trying to determine how long your particular case might take. First is, which agency is your case currently filed with? So if your case is filed with, if you have a perm labor certification, which is part of the employment-based green card process, or one of the employment-based green card processes, that is filed with Department of Labor. So you don't want to be looking at the USCIS website trying to figure out how long a Form 9089, which is the form that we use for perm labor certification, takes, because it's not filed with USCIS. Same thing for a family-based case, or perhaps even an employment-based case. If you are going through the consular processing portion, let's say you're applying for an immigrant visa, depending on where you are in the process, that might be with the Department of State. So you can't figure out processing times for that particular stage of the process by looking at the USCIS website. There are multiple agencies involved, and it's critical that you're looking at the correct website, and critical that you're looking at a government website. You can get all sorts of information from other sites online, of course, but it may or may not be accurate. Not that the information on the government website is tremendously accurate either. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you want an official source of information, then make sure you're looking at a government website. So make sure you know which agency your case is with. Number two, it is often helpful to know where your case is. And again, that's hard to know sometimes. So if we're going to focus mostly on USCIS cases, I will just say that if your case is with, if you have a perm labor certification filed, that is filed online with the Department of Labor, and there really aren't filing locations or different offices that handle that. It's all one centralized filing, and it is what it is. For USCIS, you file with a lockbox, and then your case may go to the National Benefit Center. It may go to a field office. It may go to the field office that is located in your particular area, or it may go to a totally different one. So it is hard to figure out, but knowing the location, if you can, is helpful in looking up processing times. And then there are other factors that affect government processing times, including the location. And keep in mind, you don't have a choice usually over which location to file. It is dictated by the government instructions, and that's it. So I've had people before say, hey, I want to file with the Texas Service Center instead of California. How can I do that? Move. I mean, a lot of times it's dictated by, where you live and the employer's location. It just depends on the case type. But it depends on the filing location, where your case ends up. It can depend on workload distribution. Sometimes USCIS will redistribute cases to offices or locations that don't have as big of a workload, and we don't necessarily know it. A lot of times they do send transfer notices, but I've seen cases where they don't send a transfer notice, and we don't know where the case is. It can also depend on internal agency priorities, which they may or may not announce, and that can change over time. So they may say, all right, we're really going to prioritize N-400 filings, naturalization filings, and we're going to deprioritize I-90 filings, which is the form that you use to renew a green card, for example. I'm not saying that is or is not the case, but that's an example. So they may prioritize different filings, even at different times of year. We've seen Department of Labor do that with the seasonal workers a lot, seasonal workers versus the perm labor certifications. Honestly, it also depends, I think, on the officer that you get and how busy they are. And, I know that we like to think / hope, maybe we don't think, but we hope that government agencies are efficient, but it's people who are processing the case. So I have literally had situations before where a file was misplaced. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that happens often, but it can happen. The people that are processing these cases are people, not robots or machines, which is, potentially good and bad. But it is people processing case. So it can depend on so many factors, the processing time can. So let's talk first in a little bit more detail about the employment-based cases, and then we'll focus on family-based cases and processing time. So with employment-based cases, like I said, first think about the agency. That's true for both family-based and employment-based cases. Know which agency you're dealing with. Over the years, we've had so many clients email and say, hey, I've tried to look up my PERM number on the USCIS website and it's not coming up. It's because it's a Department of Labor case. That's why it's not coming up, which is fine. We're here to educate. We're here to help clients, know these things. And honestly, for our clients, we track the cases internally, the case process, to make sure it's within processing time and everything. But anyway, know which agency you're dealing with. Try to figure out which location. On the receipt notice, a lot of times we can tell the service center where the case landed, where it's being processed. But like I said, that can change. They reallocate, they may change the filing location while your case is pending. They may reallocate cases to different service centers or field offices to reallocate the caseload. And like I said, you may or may not receive a transfer notice, which is awesome. But know the location that can affect it. Premium processing is available for employment-based cases. Not all types of employment-based cases, but a lot of employment-based cases are eligible for premium processing. So when we're talking about processing times, USCIS processing times, we'll talk in a minute about where to find those on the USCIS website. Those do not take into account premium processing. So know that if your case was filed through premium processing, or if you upgrade later and it's in premium processing, the case processing times should adhere to those premium processing timelines, which is 15 business days. It used to be calendar days. Now it's business days for most cases that are eligible for premium processing. The EB1C classification for multinational executives and managers, the I-140, and the national interest waiver, that premium processing time is 45 business days. Know that if you receive a request for evidence or NOID, notice of intent to deny, then that will stop the clock. That will stop the premium processing clock. You will then have, if it's a request for evidence, typically you have 87 days to respond. For a notice of intent to deny, typically 30 or 33 days to respond. So the clock is stopped during that time frame, from the moment they send you the request for evidence until the time that they receive your response. Once they receive your response, the time starts again, the clock starts again, but it starts anew. So once they receive your RFE response or your NOID response, then the agency has another 15 business days or 45 business days, whichever it is, to make a decision. So it's not like if they we've seen cases, of course, where agency takes 14 business days to issue the RFE. It's not like they have 1 day left to be able to decide. They have the a full 15-day period to respond. So where do you look for processing times to see what the estimated processing times are? This is when I was saying a minute ago that I said, look at government websites to make sure the information you're looking at is accurate. And then I said, wait, no, it's not accurate. And it's true. It's incredibly frustrating. But the official source for processing times is on the government website. So in this case, uscis.gov. If you Google USCIS processing times, and then one of the first websites or the first website that comes up should be the uscis.gov website, and you can look there. You can search by case type, and or it's listed by form. So you need to know the form that you submitted. But you can look online to see what they say the estimated processing time is. If you do this, take a deep breath, okay, when you look at these processing times, because you may not like them, okay? The processing times that they list on the USCIS website are most of the time incredibly long. And most of the time, or sometimes, the case isn't actually going to take that long. So really, one of the services that we try to provide for our clients is to make sure that they have realistic expectations of processing times. So we'll say, hey, the USCIS processing time for an I-90, for example, which is to renew your green card, the 10-year green card, the online processing time says 26 months, like over 2 years. And in our practice, we're seeing that it takes, this isn't necessarily helpful, but it takes anywhere from 3 days. Yes, we've seen it take 3 days to 1 year. Most of our cases take about a year to be processed. That doesn't mean that yours is going to be necessarily, but that's what we're seeing. So we try to provide that kind of context for clients, kind of on the ground information. But if you look online, it says it takes 26 months. So the way to check what USCIS says is the processing times is to look online. If premium processing is available, you generally cannot expedite a case or request that a case be expedited. So premium processing is only available for employment-based cases. So if you have like an H-1B and you, for example, and you need that petition approved for whatever reason sooner rather than later, then you really need to upgrade to premium processing. They will not entertain an expedite request. In other instances, if premium processing is not available for that particular case type, it is possible in certain circumstances to request an expedite request. That can go either way. You can make the request and it may be accepted or it may not. But that is, just know that that is available if there's a serious situation. It's not a situation where you've just been waiting a while and so you want it expedited. That's typically not going to be approved, but it is possible. So what if you look online at the processing time for your employment-based or family-based case? What if you look online at the processing time and you think, oh my goodness, my case has been taking longer than this or close to this amount of time? It's on that page, that same page, the processing time page for the form type. You can put in the date of your receipt notice. So when you file a case, whether you file online or by paper, you get a receipt notice and it'll say the date that the USCIS received the case. Again, this is kind of depressing, so you may not want to do it unless you really need to, but you can put in the date your case was received, and USCIS will tell you either that you can place a service request, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute, or that you cannot place a service request because your case is within processing times, which honestly is what it usually says. And it will give you a date that says at the bottom that says you can contact us on or after this date. So I did that for just a minute ago, just to play around, to look at it for the I-90. And we have a couple cases, I-90s, that we filed in July. I looked at it and, the processing time is 24 months. And it literally told us, it gave us a date for 2026 that we could contact them for a service request. So not encouraging. Again, you may not want to look at that unless you actually need that information, because it's not really encouraging. And honestly, a lot of times the cases are approved within that time, before that time frame anyway, not always. So what is a service request? A service request is when we, as your immigration attorney or whoever your attorney is, or the petitioner or applicant, can place a service request either online with USCIS, or you can call to place a service request. We like to do it online because we don't like waiting on the phone with USCIS. But you can place a service request, which is kind of like a friendly nudge to the officer to say, hey, this case is outside of processing times, and can you please process it, give us an update, things like that. So again, USCIS will not allow you to place a service request if the case is outside of processing time. So that's frustrating because you can't do anything if it's within what USCIS says is the processing times, which are extraordinarily long usually. But if you are able to place a service request, you will get a service request number, a confirmation number, and I highly encourage you to keep track of that if you're doing this on your own, or if you're doing it with the help of an immigration attorney. We always share that information with the clients. But anyway, keep track of the confirmation request and the date that you placed that request. Usually you will receive a response back, an email or a letter. Not always. Sometimes they just don't respond at all. But you should receive a response back saying you should hear from us within X amount of time. It may be a month later, it may be, whatever time frame later, several weeks in the future. You may or may not hear back from them by that particular date. And sometimes when you do hear back from them, they say something tremendously unhelpful, like the case is taking longer than we anticipated. Sorry about that. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what it says, which is not helpful. So if you're in a situation like that, or when we have cases in situations like that, none of this is legal advice, for educational purposes only, of course. But when we have cases like that, we place a service request as often as we can. And generally, they will not let you place service requests more often than 30 days. And coordinate with your attorney, right? Because if your attorney is placing a service request and you are, they'll only accept one of them. So make sure that you're communicating with your immigration lawyer. But you can place a service request once every 30 days-ish. Keep track of that, because if you get to the point that you have to go to congressional liaison, it's helpful to have a record of all the times that you've attempted to contact them. Or sometimes sometimes we can use liaison through AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, with local offices, or heaven forbid, if you have to file a mandamus, which is a lawsuit with the federal, against the federal government, for taking too much time basically to process your case, it's tremendously helpful to have a list of all of the attempts that you've made to contact them and what the outcome was. So keep track of that. I encourage clients to, if they're comfortable with it, to use like a Google Sheet or something, so you have a centralized place where you can keep that information. So let's turn to family-based cases now. A lot of the information that we already talked about with employment-based also applies to family-based. So again, make sure you know which agency you're dealing with. If you are waiting for an immigrant visa to be processed, USCIS is done with that case. They don't have anything to do with it. Know which location your case is, where your case is located. Like I said, that's hard to know because sometimes they transfer cases or it's filed with a central lockbox. So it can be hard to tell. The other thing to keep in mind is premium processing is not available with USCIS for family-based cases or naturalization. So where to look for processing times? You can look in two different places for processing times for family-based cases. One is the My USCIS online account, which is, anyway, you can look at the My USCIS online account. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or you can look more generally at the USCIS processing times, like I said, for employment-based cases. So if you just Google USCIS processing times, you can look up the case type. I hesitated and made that face when I said you can look at the My USCIS account for a couple of reasons. One is we as immigration lawyers don't have access to the same information, it seems, that clients do. So we have a USCIS account, a My USCIS account. We enter our clients' information, but our clients see different information or additional information than we do. That's frustrating. But even more frustrating is that My USCIS account has processing times for your particular petition. So let's say that you have an I-130 petition pending. It will say that it's at this particular stage, or it should say that, and that there are 3 months left before they're going to make a decision on the case. And you're like, yes, I've been waiting, X amount of time. I only have 3 months left. And then you log on the next week or the next month, and it says you have 10 months left to wait. So that processing time can change, and it's completely outside of our control. So if you want to look at that and pay attention to that, if that makes you feel better, that's fine. But honestly, if it were me, I think it would be even more frustrating to see those wildly inconsistent processing times that change frequently. So take it with a grain of salt. Know if you're working with an immigration attorney, at least if you're working with us, we are going to, we process or we track the cases to make sure they're within regular processing times. We can't control how long the government says is regular processing time, but we do track those, and we can give you, like I said, on the ground information about how long we're seeing cases take. That doesn't mean there are always outliers. So that doesn't mean yours is going to take that same amount of time, but we're here to comfort you. We're here to help you have realistic expectations, things like that. Yeah, but I don't love the My USCIS accounts at the moment. So if you're looking at the My USCIS, not the My USCIS, if you're looking at the USCIS processing times, another thing that's kind of frustrating is not all form types are listed there. Yay. They say that if your form type is not listed there to look, or if it says that you can follow up within 6 months, or if your case says it's at the National Benefit Center, it says if you have filed an I-485, N-400, or N-600 that you should check the processing times for the local field office where you live. So let's see what else we have to cover here. I think outside processing. Yes, so we talked about placing a service request when we talked about the employment-based cases. The same applies with family-based. You can only place a service request if the case is outside processing time per USCIS. And like I said, those processing times are ridiculously long. But if you are outside the processing time, you can place a service request. Make sure to keep track of those service requests. Keep them, the information, the number, the date, the service request number, the date, the outcome, when you should expect to hear from them, and then make a reminder to follow up again if you're doing this on your own. Or at least that's what I would do. Again, not legal advice. Remember that there are certain things that are going to affect processing times that are outside of your control and outside of the government's control. So for example, a key example of this is the priority date. It's not uncommon for us to have clients say, hey, our case has been pending for X number of years. Let's say an I-485 has been pending for X years and it's not really going anywhere. What can we do? We haven't followed up and we can't because the priority date is not current. The priority date has to be current in order for that I-485 to be approved. So there are things that even though the processing time, the case may be without or outside rather, the processing time, we're waiting on the priority date to become current. Finally, my final tip here is for the I-751. Those, of course, are taking a very long time. When you file an like 2 years is what we're seeing regularly. If you file an I-751 and you file an N-400 concurrently, not concurrently, but if you have you file the I-751 and then let's say roughly a year later, you're able to file the N-400, the application for naturalization, USCIS, when they receive that N-400 application, they will grab the the I-751 petition as well. They'll request it if it's in another office, or they'll get it, if it's within their same office, and they'll process both of those together. So if you have an N-400 pending and an I-751, you want to focus on the processing times for the N-400s, which are thankfully in general much shorter than the I-751 processing times. So this was a lot of information. I feel like I've been talking a long time. I hope that you found it helpful. I think the main takeaway for this is to know that the processing times that are available online with USCIS are incredibly long. And that does not necessarily mean that your case is going to take that long, but it is important that you make sure that your case is within the processing time. And if it's not, to start placing service requests as soon as you can and do that continuously. That's what we do in our practice. So I hope that you found this information helpful. I know that it can be incredibly frustrating trying to wait out the processing times. It can be frustrating seeing the processing times change seemingly without reason, whether it's on the My USCIS account or the general USCIS website. But know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And there are things that you can do sometimes to follow up on a case, or at least there will be if the case isn't resolved by the time USCIS thinks it will be. So I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, please share this video with a friend or a colleague. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next video. Our next Live at Lunch will be next Tuesday at noon Eastern. Until then, my name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law. We help clients, both companies, corporations, organizations, and individuals and families with employment-based and family-based immigration matters around the United States and around the world. Until next Tuesday.